Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar, one of the first being delivered by the new Horizon 2020 project CommBeBiz. I'm delighted to have this opportunity. My name is Rhonda Smith and I'm the coordinator of CommBeBiz, and my company Minerva, based in the UK, is a key partner in the project. Today's webinar is regarding message mapping, and you may well be asking, what on earth is that? I call it message mapping. There's a number of other organizations and that actually use the same kind of techniques but give it a different title. But the whole aim of this is to see how we can more strategically help research projects to transfer their knowledge more effectively. We know that much research is done, excellent research is done, but actually if it's not transferred to the right stakeholders in the right way and importantly at the right time, then it may be that that research, that knowledge, the findings, the potential products, the potential policy information is not taken up by the right stakeholders. So I would say that what message mapping is a strategic and organic tool. I don't seem to be changing the slides here. Hold on a second. Here we go. A strategic and organic tool which aids our planning, our progressing, our monitoring and our measuring of our knowledge transfer activities and actions. We're not mind readers. There are some experiments that seem to be ever more successful at allowing us to transfer knowledge immediately, from one brain to another. But I think from a practical perspective, that's not going to be available to us for some time to come. So what's important is that we think about the messages that we wish to transmit and think about how they're going to be received, how they're going to be and whether they've been understood, and whether the groups to which we've transferred that message and that information, they're actually going to take the action that we would like them to, or indeed have adopted the message in order to become an ambassador for us. And what's really important is that we think very clearly about how we're going to check this. How are we going to check that actually the message has been sent? So much message sending now is done electronically, and it's very difficult to track exactly whether that message is actually being read or actually taken on board. And when we say, or when we ask the question, has a message received, this is more about, has that actually been received into the consciousness of our potential recipient, not just about whether it's landed in their inbox. It's pretty easy, as we all know, to try and ask for a read receipt. I'm quite allergic to actually pressing the yes button to that most of the time. But the next stage, apart from whether it's been received, is whether that message has been understood in the way that we want it to be understood. With research projects, particularly European funded projects, we all work, as we know, within a multidisciplinary setting, and we all work with different geographies and different languages, which makes it even more important that we endeavour to ensure that message that we've sent and hopefully been received has been understood in the most appropriate way. That doesn't mean to say that everybody will receive and understand that message in exactly the same way, but it's relevant, to them, and they've taken it on board. And hopefully then they've actually done something with that message to action it, or indeed to adopt it. Whether we want them to go back to a website, or whether we want to put some more information into a newsletter, or if we want them to forward that message on to their own networks. We need to build in a way in which we can check whether action has been taken or whether it's been adopted. Messaging. It's really important from a research project's viewpoint that we don't accept the fact that one simple message given in the same way, delivered in the same way, is going to create the impact that we need. A message mapping activity can really reinforce these key messages. One size does not fit all. We have to spend time tailoring, targeting. We need to ensure that different audiences, we understand what those different audiences require in terms of different messages, because the message that we're sending out from our research and from our projects, they're not going to be relevant in the same way to each and every audience. So we have to get into the minds, into the mindset of those to whom we are transmitting that information. Different audiences will require different languages. I don't mean physical languages, that is Greek for language, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be in their own native language, but it has to take into account jargon, different ways of expressing ourselves, whether it's from a national language viewpoint or from our subspecialty viewpoint. And one of the most effective ways that we can help reinforce our messages is to use images and/or the very popular now infographics. But again, the infographics have to be relevant, they have to be targeted, and we have to spend time in generating, the right kind of material, the right kind of messages for each stakeholder group that's important for us. We can, of course, dilute core messages into what we might call sound bites, but again, we have to be careful not to dilute the message too much that it becomes too generic and therefore is not taken up by policy players, for example, or not taken up by very specialist industry groups. We have to think very hard about this, how we're actually going to go about creating the messaging that's going to work for us, it's going to work for our project, and deliver the impact that is now required of us through the contracts that we sign with any funding agency. In addition to thinking about that content, in thinking about the content that we are generating in different ways for different stakeholders, it's vital also that we think about the actions that are going to be required in order to match each of those stakeholder groups and the scenarios within which they are operating. So, for example, if you've got a global organization, you're going to need to think very differently compared to an organization or a stakeholder group that is nationally based or subspecialty based. Is it better to communicate with them via online? Is it best to do it via website? Is it best to actually ensure that you've got a mention in a newsletter that perhaps is only going to be seen by 200 people compared to making front page news in your local national newspaper? We have to think long and hard about what it is that we want to happen as a result of that intense effort we've made in creating our messages, delivering them and checking that they've been received. We now have at our disposal a wide variety of channels that can be utilised in order to deliver messages. Obviously, as humans, we are very geared to one-to-one communication. Our brains are geared to accept messages, to hear stories on a one-to-one basis, but we can now utilise many channels in different ways. Online provides us with big opportunities, but I think a word of caution that actually online will not deliver all the results that we require. There will need to be some element of reinforcement of any messages that are sent online in terms of face-to-face meetings, maybe events such as GoToMeetings, webinars of this kind, but also media plays a very important part in that mix. Now, some people and researchers, people working in very specialist areas, quite often are extremely wary of utilising the media because their perception is that they never get it right, that it's much better therefore not to engage. But let me encourage you to think more positively about the utilisation of media, because not only do they have a very influential part to play in reflecting current opinion, current perception, but they also have a very important part to play in helping to shape future perception future understanding. And identifying the different media, whether it's trade media, i.e. Specialist journals, not just peer-reviewed journals, but the ones that go out to a wider base of readers, looking at that area, but also looking at national newspapers, where many of them still do employ, either on the staff or as freelancers, very, very experienced journalists who can help understand the project and the research that you're doing, and can help promote those messages. Let's not forget that every single Prime Minister across all the European nations, every single Chancellor who's looking at finances, every single major player within industry also read the newspapers. And we know that within corporates, for example, a great deal of emphasis and budget is allocated to tracking the reputation of their particular organisation, but also to horizon scanning the topics within which they work. So if you have a project that has potential to be utilised, say, within the IT sector, or within the forest, paper, pulp sector, or the marine sector, then utilising the newspapers and their specialist media can be extremely helpful for you to get the knowledge out that you require. Timing is also critical in the sense that quite often you can have the most brilliant idea in the world, but if your timing is completely out, so the world is not ready for your idea, or you don't get that idea at the right out into the sectors and to the right people at the right time, then it's going to be effort wasted. So when we're thinking about our messaging and our message mapping, we also have to think about the stages at which different stakeholder groups are going to be most interested in the information that we are, and the knowledge that we are generating and wish to transmit to them. So again, going back to the first point, one size, one action, one timing does not fit all. We have to think about staging the way in which we deliver those messages. So, message mapping. Having talked about those generic points, what actually does it need? Well, I think it needs a mindset that thinks positively and strategically about how we're going to approach this task. And one of the most difficult things, I think, for research projects and those people who are working in the communications and dissemination side of research is that you have to make very hard choices. What is it that we are actually going to communicate to this particular group at this particular time, and in which way? And we know that from scientists and researchers' viewpoint, what they like to do is to tell it all. They want to cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and make sure that everybody has the full picture. But with communications, whether it's specialist communications or generic communications, you really have to make hard choices. You also have to make very hard choices about who you're actually going to prioritize. Most research projects will come up with a list of stakeholders that is extremely long. Covers everybody from your EC project officer through to the consumer, through to media, industry groups, policy players, and so on. And again, this exercise really needs you to think long and hard about what your priorities are and how you're going to stage the work that you're doing. In the area that we're talking about knowledge transfer and communications and dissemination, often we have very restricted budgets. So it makes it even more important that you make choices and you set your priorities according to the resources that you have. And that sometimes means that you have to leave aside what right at the beginning you thought was an essential part of your job. So choices, priority setting of the different stakeholder groups and the activities you're going to engage in. The next two points that I'd like to make is actually for message mapping, you need to be absolutely clear about your messages. You need to make sure that they're going to be understood and understandable by the different stakeholder groups that you are addressing. So the definition here of clarity is the quality of being clear or easy to understand. Now that doesn't mean to say that you have to dumb it down, as we say in English, right to its very bare essentials, but you need to make sure that you give people the opportunity to get on board with you at an early stage. And if you don't do that, you're likely to lose your audience quite quickly. So think about clarity, clarity, clarity across the board. Creativity. I think again with science and research projects and people who work within science and research, particularly in academia, we know that scientists, less than maybe social scientists, maybe less than humanities students, are not encouraged to be very creative about the way that they think about how they're going to communicate. It's not an area that's rewarded within the scientific community. What is rewarded, as we all know, are the peer-reviewed articles that appear in academic journals. But thinking about creatively how you're actually going to demonstrate and how to talk about the work that you're doing, the very important work that you're doing, and how it's relevant and applicable to a wide range of stakeholders, sometimes it's really helpful to look outside the box. Another generic phrase that's used a lot, but think about how you might utilize more creative ways in order to present the information that you are wishing to transmit. Einstein said this: imagination is more important than knowledge. We could have a very big and long debate about that, but if the knowledge that we're generating is not transmitted imaginatively, then it may be missed. And somebody, I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but an erudite person said that if research is not communicated, then in effect it has not been done. What we don't want are dozens of really good peer-reviewed articles sitting in journals and that knowledge not being transmitted. We do have to try and find ways and try and persuade academia to think about how they might reward such activity more positively. One of the previous project that I worked on, and some of you may know of it, was CommNet. And one of the things we did in CommNet with our training courses was actually to take our courses to science education centres, where before we started the course, we got our candidates to actually go round the science exhibition centres and think about how this very important information is being transmitted in a fun, learning way to children. And sometimes that helps people to spark different ways in which they can think about it. We know that we have to be much more interactive when we're dealing with children. We have to show them, we have to engage them, we have to give them things to do. Maybe there are some gems in there that we can utilize regarding the transfer of our knowledge and information when we're talking about perhaps what we might consider more serious and more erudite audiences that we're wishing to talk to. But why should children have all the fun? Let's have some fun in there. That's good for everybody. So we've made some choices, some hard choices. We've made some hard priorities. We've thought long and hard about the clarity of our messages. We've thought a bit creatively about how we're going to do this and what it looks like. How do we know if we've succeeded? In terms of a message map, this is really, really important. Alongside everything else that we're doing, we need to think about how we're going to measure the work that we've done and how it's been received, and whether we need to actually adjust the way that we're doing things. So measurements can be quantity, that's relatively easy. We can be collecting data about the number of people, for example, who are on this webinar in real time and the number of people who will be accessing the webinar afterwards. But how are we going to measure what people think and take away from this webinar and what they're going to do afterwards with it? Have we done it in the most appropriate way? Have we created the material that's useful for them? Is it something that they're going to go away and talk to their colleagues about and maybe think differently about how they're planning their work going forward? We need those quality measures as well as the quantity. And in fact, you've got to find ways of meshing those two things together to make it ever more effective. Reflecting on the work that we're doing, having measured, having looked at the data that we've been able to collect in whichever way is the most important. Maybe what we've done is, if we've got 50 people who've taken part in an event, maybe what we do is decide to phone up 6 of them to actually get some qualitative data from them, qualitative reflection from them about how they responded to the activity that we've delivered for them. And that will help us to reflect much more about what did not go as well as those things that did go well. And part of CommBeBiz's mission throughout the whole of our 3-year project is to be very honest about what we found out, about what really does work and what doesn't work. We want to be able to feed back at the end of our project what we've called a blueprint to the EC and to many other agencies working in knowledge transfer and communications about what we have found out is not really the value, doesn't deliver the value that we really would like in the activity that we've focused both our attention and our hard-won grant making money that we've received. So, little note there that says define reflection. Well, it's about self-monitoring ourselves, it's about being self-aware, not only of our own particular actions, but obviously the actions of the project that we're managing, and really having a good 360-degree look at how that went. And then making sure that we assess that, report that. We all have to do that, whichever our funding agency is that we're engaged with, and if necessary, adjust it. So one of the things I would say that with message maps is that you can start off with a very, very good comprehensive message map, but if that then becomes a static document, then it's not doing the job it should be doing. If, for example, you're in a 5-year research project, it should be something that's reviewed annually, adjusted, and obviously then a new version of that is issued. It gives you an opportunity, a map where you've collected all this information to really review quite hard and think about how you're going to do things differently. It might mean minor tweaking, it might mean actually something a little bit more radical is required in order to deliver the result that your project deserves. So, choices, priorities, clarity, creativity, measurement, reflection, and ongoing monitoring. How are you going to think about pulling this all into what I've called a message map? Well, the version I use, and this is only one way of doing it, is to create a matrix, a simple matrix that brings together all that information that you've collated and thought through very carefully. Your identified priority stakeholder groups, the clear take-home message, for each of those groups. What is it that you want that group to actually take out from what you're delivering to them and what you're saying to them? And if you can, include in that message map, in that matrix, a current status of where you think that group is at regarding your message and the product that you are wanting to deliver to them. It could be negative, it could be positive, it could in fact be completely neutral because you are delivering to them something brand new that they're not likely to be aware of. And the most important thing regarding the matrix is that it also helps you to think clearly about how you're going to drive an appropriate shift in that group, in that chosen priority stakeholder group, about the awareness they have of the copy that the content that you're generating, aware of their level of understanding and a level of where there is a potential for them to actually adopt what you're saying. It also gives you indications about the content that you need to create and in which way. Is it a PowerPoint presentation? Is it an infographic? Do you need to actually set up a roundtable meeting to get experts together? Do you need to actually have a global congress? Really important that you think through the objectives of all of those and the outcomes that you want. The channels, the targets you need to reach in order to give you a level of satisfaction that you are reaching the success points that you wish to lay down for this, and your measurement and reflection measures, as we said in the previous slide. There we go. So this is a simple matrix. So you could actually start off with a blank piece of paper and come up with a simple matrix that looks rather like this. So on the one side, you have your stakeholder group that you've prioritized. Really important that you don't, that actually at the first stage that you put in all your potential stakeholders, but you do prioritize them and probably put them in phased groups. Some people will show that as a target perhaps with 3 rims, which you've got 3 stages, 3 priority groups. The bullseye would be your number 1 priorities, a second rim around would be your second priority, and your third would be your perhaps nice to know and nice to engage with, but not as not higher priority as the ones you've put at the center. You need to think about those take-home messages for that group that you wish to transmit to them. And you may have a standard message that's absolutely okay for all of them, but that's not enough. You need then to have tailored messages that are very, very relevant to that particular group. Current stakeholder group perception is, are they neutral because they're unaware? Are they aware and positive? Are they aware and negative perhaps? Can you somehow assess their level of understanding, their potential to provide support to you, and in cascading your message and helping to raise understanding? Can they actually be ambassadors for you? And there may be one priority group that actually is really important that you convert them into ambassadors for the project. Maybe this is a group of MEPs in the European Parliament. Maybe this is a patient group if you're working within a health arena. Maybe these are 2 or 3 highly targeted and highly useful journalists, which you can convert into your project watchers, so to speak. So they're very keen to pick up on every single bit of information that you're willing to throw at them. The next column is about what are we going to do in order to help effect the shift that we need in order to convert them from, hopefully most people won't be negative at the start, but from an unaware status to an understanding status. Then the action that's required in order to do that, and this obviously will be dependent very much on budget and on the urgency of the situation. One thing to remember, I think with all funding agencies now, and definitely with European Commission funded projects, is that you need to start this effort right at the start of the project. It's not one that you have to sit back and wait for the results. You need to bring these stakeholders along with you along your journey of the project so that you don't suddenly come out with results at the end, but one in which you're actually engaging your key stakeholder groups all along the effort so that they can help contribute, to that final result. And then measuring that success, how are we going to actually collect the numbers? How are we going to collect the insights, the quality information? How are we actually going to measure progression? How can we actually measure whether one group of stakeholders has actually moved, from one position to another, hopefully in a positive direction? And we may be able to do this in a group format. We may need to do it as individuals, and we may be able to do it via a third party. If we have, say, again going back to the health example, if there's a patient group, for example, or a healthcare professional group that we wish to ensure know more about the change in practice, the new guidelines that are being issued, then maybe we can get that feedback via another third party, which could be very helpful both from your resource viewpoint but also the time that you can spend on this. Reflection, reporting, revision, most important to build that into the cycle, and then to think about what changes and adjustments we actually require. So just a quick snapshot about what CommBeBiz's first first efforts, if you like, at a message map might look like. Stakeholder group, maybe we should see our first stakeholder group as CommBeBiz EC funded projects, you know, the FP7 projects that have both been finished but are also still underway. They're a priority because they're obviously focused completely on our bioeconomy topic. And what might be we wanting to say to them? Well, our core message is, of course, is that we've got services that will help you achieve the impact that is now required of you. But what will be important is that we segment those messages for each of the cluster groups that we are addressing. So what a project that's working within a biotech sector will want to see is thinking about success stories, material that actually, and examples that will demonstrate to that sector that actually this is relevant for them. And what they want to see will be very different from a project that's focused, say, on food security. And getting the right people to actually drive those messages, to own those messages and actually to convey them is also important. So not only is it the message, but the messenger can also be very important for you. And certainly CommBeBiz is looking for experts in the different fields that we can then utilize and help with our knowledge transfer support actions. So the shift, I think, is all about telling the story. It's about showing the human face. It's about giving people the case studies and the examples so they can see that this is really relevant to them. And that's something we've been thinking very clearly about. How might we start doing this? Well, one of the actions definitely that we will be doing is that we'll be customizing our mail outs to segments with those success case studies and stories, so that again people can see, the recipients can see then how relevant it is for them. But that won't be the only action. We'll be reinforcing those with individual connections through phone calls, through follow-up emails, and endeavouring to actually connect really with the people involved. I think people for CommBeBiz is our main point of contact, and through the people we will get to understand their propositions. We'll be getting to understand the projects which they're involved and how we can support them get their messages to the right people, and of course the projects within which they are working. But part of our mission is to raise the competence and confidence of everyone working in the research community to step up to the mark and really communicate what they're doing much more effectively than perhaps they have been able to do in the past. We have obviously an action plan, and we'll be looking at, and we have measures that we're building into every single action that we do, measures of success, which we as a whole project will be looking at. We'll be reflecting on how things went in that particular action area and what we can do to improve our next efforts regarding that. It may be that for some actions where we're perhaps not getting the response that we require, that we will have to make special efforts, perhaps via a social media push, to ensure that we're trying to get to people at the right time. So as you can see, it's quite a complex way of thinking this through, but if you don't do that in the first place, then you're almost certainly not going to get the impact that you would wish your project to receive. So the other stakeholder groups that we might be thinking about would be other EC-funded bioeconomy contacts, for example, so projects that are not within the CommBeBiz formal community. Definitely we are speaking with research funders because we know they're important. They're going to cascade information about what CommBeBiz is doing to the different projects that they are funding. So we're going to be talking to the ERAnets and to the other project platform which coordinates the ERA network later in the year. And obviously knowledge transfer experts are also on our radar because we want them to be looking at the projects with which we're engaged so that they can then assess how they can support them even more. We could go on with this list, but again, the most important exercise is to prioritize them. So our priority is our customers. So these are the research projects whether they're funded by CommBeBiz or in the other funded calls, that's where we will be operating. And we hope that the projects that you're involved in and other projects that perhaps you know about will engage with us more and more as time progresses. So why should we engage with this? Now, if you're involved in research projects, message mapping can be a very, very useful exercise to undertake. We know from experience that when you're working within a research project, that perhaps the communications dissemination side of the exercise is not appreciated or given the right kind of budget in order to deliver the result that might be required of the project. Knowledge transfer usually sits within the exploitation side, and again, from experience and from knowledge, we know that quite often the top priority in terms of exploitation is to think about how we can move on to the next iteration of research. Within Horizon 2020 and with all modern funding agencies now, whether they're nationally based, regionally based or sectorally based, they want to see impact about how the knowledge is going to be transferred. So it's really important that we think about measures in which we can demonstrate that we can do this more effectively for more projects and within, obviously, an appropriate budget and timescale. So if you are responsible for communications, dissemination, knowledge transfer, exploitation, if you can set about setting up an exercise of this kind, it can help demonstrate to your project coordinator, most of whom will be from the research environment, where they'll be wanting to see some evidence base of the rationale that you're utilizing to underpin the work that you're doing. It helps you to use the right language with them. It shows you that you've thought things through, and it helps that journey right from the start. We also know from experience that within a research project where you've got a multitude of partners, whether it's 7 or 17, that most of them will have a very different view about communications and knowledge transfer priorities and possibilities. So if at the start of a project you can actually get this exercise laid down so that you can start to build a consensus, then it can only help you in your work that you're doing and also help the way that it's reported upon. So it's seen as strategic, it's seen as logical, it's seen as measured, and it's seen as evaluated. It also becomes an engagement activity for all research partners, and it can help them actually think about how they can support this very important aspect of the work, whereas before, perhaps from academia's viewpoint, it's not been seen as an important topic. And as I said, it gives you an evidence base. If you've gone through this exercise, it gives you a much more validated base for any of your communications and knowledge transfer planning that you do. It also helps you argue your case regarding budgeting, for example. Always difficult, obviously, if it's post the start of the project. But at least it helps you think about where you might be able to utilize budgets and maybe persuade partners to utilize more of their budgets to help support this activity. It creates this benchmark against which you can map your change that you're creating and delivering, about awareness within a stakeholder group, perception, if you've been able to do some qualitative interviews perhaps, and actually demonstrate that you're driving action towards supporting what you're doing. Really important, of course, for the reporting phase, evidence for your partners, your coordinator, the reviewers, most importantly, who won't really know very much about your project until they start looking at it. If you can demonstrate that evidence base, that collection of data, that would be really helpful. And if you can create this focus, it really helps to start to create what we would call the project story. We believe that every single research project, in fact every kind of project, has a story to tell. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. It has a proposition at the start, what was your hypothesis? It has characters in terms of the people involved in it. It most often will have drama of some kind in terms of the challenges you're facing and the actions taken to overcome those challenges, and it will have a result. You may have results, you may have an ending actually at different stages in the project. Most important that you think about that, and it can really help drive much more creative thinking about how you're going to deliver that at all stages of the project, and not at the end when the major results may be being emanated and coming out of via peer-reviewed papers. Just remember that from the EC's viewpoint, the peer-reviewed publication side, the scientific publications, is not seen as dissemination and knowledge transfer. It is seen as part of your ordinary job. That's part what you should be doing as scientists, and all this other kind of activity is something that should be geared to work up to that, and to obviously use the scientific knowledge via the peer-reviewed papers as a starting point and not seen as an end point. You may want to try and set up a message mapping session. So if you can, just a few points here, if you can get it done at the proposal stage, fabulous. Sometimes too difficult because often there's too much work going into the actual shape of the project. If you can, it demonstrates to the coordinator, that you know what you're doing. You need to make it easy to attend. Maybe you'll arrange it on the back of regular meetings. Plenty of notice, send materials in advance, do some homework yourself, create a blank matrix with some first examples so that people know what you're talking about, so they get it as quickly as possible. Facilitate the day. This kind of session needs facilitation. You need to encourage people to contribute, and you need to interact with all the challenges, the interpretations that are happening through that exercise. And you need to follow up very quickly. Follow it up with the draft results and encourage feedback, and finalize that message map and plan in that cycle of such sessions so it doesn't become a static document. It becomes a living document for you to use. Huge benefits if you're able to do this. Just again to summarize, you've engaged your partners, you've validated the document, it becomes that sound base and benchmark, and it's that evidence base from which you've developed an agreed methodology to see what you're to actually measure what you've done. You've thought through what you're going to do, and you've measured what you've done, and you've adjusted your tactics as and when it's important to do so. And just as a final remark, those of you who are involved in Horizon 2020 projects will know that actually this Article 38, it's now a legal requirement, 38.1, you must promote the action, i.e. your project, and its results by providing targeted information to multiple audiences, in brackets including the media and the public, in a strategic and effective manner. That doesn't mean to say that you've got to go all guns blazing to all these stakeholders all the time, but you need a strategic approach, and hence utilizing something like a message mapping approach could work for you. And again, in the grant agreement with Horizon 2020, you have to show that you've got a comprehensive communications plan, you have a work package, you've thought about the public policy perspective of what you're doing. It's got to be proportionate to the scale of the action, and obviously you're free to choose the type of action, but you need to be able to justify the type of action that you've chosen, whether it's a global congress or whether it's a targeted roundtable meeting. You need to be able to justify it. And a message mapping exercise that makes you think clearly about your priorities, about the messages and how you're going to customize those for each stakeholder group can be extremely helpful here. So that's it from me regarding a message map. CommBeBiz, we've only been going a few months now, so we're still gearing up, but what we hope is you who've joined us in real time today and those who download the webinar, which will be available because it's all been recorded on the web platform. We hope that you'll join us. Very simple registration process on the web platform when it goes live. We'll be delivering a whole series of webinars, both on generic topics like this one, but also what we've called testinars, where different projects will be commented upon and supported by experts in different fields of industry and different fields of policy making, so that it can support research projects to again think much more clearly about how they're going forward with their knowledge transfer. Our knowledge hubs will be set up in terms of the segments across the bioeconomy, and we'll be having annual meetings and opportunities, including awards. So please watch our space. We will keep in contact with you by email if that's okay, and ensure that as soon as our web platform is up, you get first opportunity to register with us. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed for joining today. Look forward to meeting you again soon, whether it's in person or via or online. And here you can find links as to where CommBeBiz is active. And the webinar will be available via YouTube through this link, or indeed via the CommBeBiz website. Thank you all very much indeed.